Welcome to Ancient Wales, a series that will discuss the history of Wales and more specifically Britain as it existed in the Iron Age in leading into Roman Britain. This will be the focus of the series. We will be discussing and diving into much more detail the stories, the archaeology, and the evidence that leads us to what we know about Britain in these periods. In part, this is driven because in the first few episodes of the Welsh History podcast, we did give a discussion about this, but I wanted to give a more thorough and more fulsome discussion on this issue. I think it's important for us to understand where the ideas and the makeup of what we consider to be Welsh history comes from. And I wanted to dive much more into some of the subjects that I was only able to give maybe an episode or not even a full episode on, specifically talking about the history of the Iron Age, talking about the archaeology of the Iron Age, and how interrelationships between various tribes would have worked and trading between various locations. We dived only into the very surface level of these discussions, and I definitely want to take more time with them. I think it's important for us to understand all of this in context, and I want to give much more responsible and thorough discussions. It's my hope to be able to bring in experts also in the field to talk and share information if I'm able. Hopefully, as we go along, we'll be able to do that. I don't have a firm start end as far as I don't have a concept of what the amount of episodes will be for this series, but it'll be longer than maybe I'm considering at this point. This will be a monthly series. It will come out in likely the last week of each month, with the exception of December, where obviously things are a little bit different. But my hope is to put out the first episode at the end of October 2024 and continue the series on from there. I hope you'll join me. I hope you'll find this fascinating and interesting. There seemed to be a good feedback from the viewers and listeners on it. And I've always felt like some of the early episodes, I wasn't able to go into as much detail as I could, simply because at the time I didn't have access to all the sources I can get to now. I didn't have the opportunity to really look into things. And in a couple cases, I picked up what I thought were quality writings, which academically weren't as strong as I had hoped. So I'm hoping to go further into these stories and into this idea to talk about things in a way that are much better and a lot more similar to the current podcast, where there's more depth, there's more explanations. I mean, you think about the fact that we've spent the better part of 25 episodes just talking about the first 40 years of the 1800s and the amount of things that we covered in that and how we sort of set the table for things. That's kind of where I want to go with this series. I want it to be, in a way, layered so that we can understand where we started and where we're going. And because of that, obviously because of the entire situation around this series will not necessarily be a Welsh focused series. We need to talk about Scotland. We need to talk about England. All of these things give more context and more details and more information around the settlements in the Iron Age, how the tribes interacted, what the conflicts were, how did they trade with one another, how did they trade with people across the English Channel, and what was the influences that were passed between them, which come to at least influence the ones that the Romans have contact with. And hopefully we'll be able to give more detail and more understanding about all this. That's something I really want to do. And one of the earliest things that I've been coming across and really wanted to do a better job of discussing is Druids, because they have a lot of specious ideas are built up around them. At the same time, there's a lot more information that's come out, a lot better academic writing than what I initially had access to. A lot of what I had initially was more popular history. So I want to do a better job of that. That's one of the areas I really want to delve into again and do a lot more discussions. And there's so much more you can talk about with all of this, especially about the sacred nature of the landscape in Britain at the time and how varied and different the landscape was from what we perceive and consider today, and how that influenced the way people were brought up and how they felt about their surroundings. Yes, we can't get into details of writings or someone who's written a book discussing, yesterday I went to the roundhouse and did this and did that. That's not going to be the way it's going to work. But what we can do is we can delve into the archaeology and talk about the things that were found and what we believe happened in those sites and in those locations, and how that understanding and belief changed from what we thought in the 1800s and 1900s to today, and how much that has changed our perception on the past and our understanding of the past, something that is incredibly important to our history today. And of course, I want to delve into Roman Britain, which is a time that lasted for about 400 years and has a lasting influence on the landscape, to the point where roads that were used and developed by the Romans that may have been ancient pathways before that, considered and continued into this day. I want to delve more into why that is and what brought us to that point, and why were the Romans so fascinated by delving into these things and creating these roads and creating these logistical shipping lanes in effect on land, and what drove most of their original agenda on settling into Britain. How did they get here? What did they do? What were the battles they were fighting and why? And I want to cover areas that we didn't talk about in the podcast, such as the invasions of Scotland, the creation of Hadrian's Wall and the later Antonine Wall, and how that movement was stunted and why. And why Britain became a significant place for emperors and for generals to make a name for themselves at different points in its history. And why was it so important to the Romans? What was the reasons? Again, we delved to an extent into this. I want to make a much better and more detailed discussion about it. It's my goal, and one of the reasons why we're holding off till the end of October to do the first proper episode is simply because I want to have enough in my accumulated research to be able to come out with a proper episode each month and not be struggling to find stuff. And part of the reason why I'm not as happy with the early episodes is because I struggled to find information, and I ended up relying on stuff that was not necessarily the best of source material, and that's something I want to correct. So call it a second chance if you want, call it a deeper dive if you want. I think both of those are accurate. And hopefully this will be a place where you come to learn not just about Welsh history, but also about other histories and how significant they were to the ancient Wales, ancient Britain, and how they influenced what we have in the modern day. We'll definitely be talking a lot more about the sacred nature of Wales and Britain in general, about what I hope to be instructive on some of what we think the rituals were and why they did some of the things they did, and to discuss in more depth about that. We'll also talk about living space, about life in that time period, about how landscape changes influenced so much of what people were doing at the time, and how areas of land that we thought looked a certain way in the past may have changed or may look different now. Why is it that there's so much more pottery in the Roman period versus, say, even the medieval period? And talk about what that pottery is, what its use was for, why was it so significant that the Romans would ship it all over their empire for it? What brought the Romans to come to Britain, and what was the draw, as well as the factors that were pulling them from their own location? What was the factors that were pushing them towards Britain and towards conquering this landscape? All of these things, like I said, we've touched on, we've skimmed on, but I want to give much more in-depth discussion about this. I want to spend a bit more time talking about those people that we know about in history who had influence or had a reason to write about and talk about Wales. The authors such as Tacitus and Suetonius and so many others who have talked about Wales, those that we know of and those that we've only heard of, who discussed it in some standpoint or other. We want to give much more depth to that understanding. And so that's a big part of why I want to do this. I hope you'll stick with me, stick with the podcast throughout this. I think it'll be a lot of fun. I think it'll be a very educational series, as always, for myself, because obviously, first and foremost, I learn a lot from doing this podcast. There is so much stuff I did not know before I started the podcast, or there were things I thought I knew that turned out to be incorrect. And I really appreciate the way this podcast has taught me. So hopefully it's teaching you something of value, something useful. And I hope you'll come with me in this discussion so that we can have this conversation, so that we can continue to be able to build something that is long lasting and contributes to all of us. In the meantime, of course, our other 2 episodes in the month will continue to be about Welsh history in the period we're in right now, as we continue to move forward in the history of Wales. Currently, we're talking about the late 1840s. We'll be moving on into the 1850s, probably about the time of the new year, either just before or just after. And then we'll move into the latter half of the 1800s after that. And I expect we'll continue to be talking about that for a while due to everything that happens. And of course, we still have World War I, World War II, and so much more to talk about. So many more fascinating things. And in the history of, the education of, the experiences of Welsh people from the beginning to the modern times, whatever we want to call modern times. I hope, once again, you are interested in enjoying Freeform, which is just my little discussion series that I do similar to this particular episode, where it's off the cuff and it's not always as scripted or thought out in advance. And I think it's a worthwhile discussion. I try and keep it focused specifically on Wales and on the cultures and different things about Wales. I'm sure will vary as time goes on to other things, but as long as I have that subject to talk about, that'll still be a monthly episode. Thank you all for paying attention to this episode. Thank you so much for everything you do. I just want to thank specifically all the patrons who have donated to the Welsh History Podcast, some of you from the beginning almost. Without your support, without your continued help, I don't think I could have carried on this podcast for a number of years as I have. You have helped to fund so much research that I couldn't have done without you. I understand that there are ads now in the podcast, which is a break from what we originally had, but I think at the same time, that's also helping. One of the reasons why I can do this series is because of the income that is coming in because of those things. So I appreciate all of you who listen to those ads, and because they help to fund this podcast, and more importantly, help to fund the history, so that I am not relying on just one source or just one document for everything I'm talking about. And it gives me the opportunity to do my best to try and make it interesting and actually be as factual as possible. Something which would be difficult with just one or at most 2 sources. This is, again, one of the reasons why I wanted to redo this, is because, or not even redo, but one of the reasons why I wanted to revisit this discussion is because I think so much has changed and so much new has come, and so many great historians have contributed to the understanding that we have about this period. It's almost like I feel duty bound to go back and revisit and give a better job of it. So I hope you'll join me on this quest. And I thank everybody who listens or watches this podcast on YouTube. If you don't know how to find it, if you found it in one and don't know where the other one is, you can listen to this podcast on Spotify, on Apple Podcast, or just about any other podcatching app that you have on your phone. It is something that I'm so proud of, because when I started, it was just a podcast. We've only recently moved into video formats on YouTube. And if you want, you can go to youtube.com/Welsh History Podcast, and there you will find all of these episodes uploaded there. I want to say, since episode 219, I've been uploading video versions of the podcast to go along with the vocal podcast. I appreciate it if you listen in any capacity. It's always welcome. Your comments are always welcome. If you have contributions to the discussion, I really enjoyed the stuff that I talked about last week with Ohio, and getting feedback from someone who lived in the area and was able to talk about it was one of the nicer conversations to have because it gives more depth and more detail on some of it, including the fact that I didn't know New London still exists. And all of that is so helpful and so amazing and builds on my understanding. So thank you very much, everybody. Again, if you want to follow me on other social media, you can do that on X/Twitter, Welsh History Pod. You can also follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Welsh History Podcast. And once again, like I said, if you want to contribute to the podcast in any way, you can do so, though there's no obligation, at patreon.com/Welsh History. There are some special episodes that I did record up there, but it's been a while, I admit. But mostly that contribution helps me to purchase the books and material that I desperately want to have for this podcast to do it right. And for that, for all of you who have ever contributed, no matter how much it was, thank you very much. You guys are awesome. And I look forward to continuing to bring you as much as I can for as long as I can. Hopefully I'm doing this series another 10, 20 years. It's actually stunning to me to think that we're almost to the 8.5 year mark now, which seems insane when I think about it, but it's the truth. And so thank you, everybody. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care. Bye-bye. Welsh History Podcast is a member of the Evergreen Podcast Network. To find more information on them, you can do so at evergreenpodcast.com. Thanks for listening.